Hello and thanks for joining me. Well, it's an absolutely glorious spring day right at the end of May and no prizes for guessing where I am. Now we're still in lockdown here in Wales, so no chance of getting up to any mountains because what they've said is we're limited to a maximum of driving 5 miles from our home. And that really hasn't made any difference to me simply because 5 miles was pretty much my radius for cycling. But I have been down to Llanddwyn Island a couple of times previously because it's just about 5 miles from my front door. On previous occasions, of course, I didn't stand around making videos, I didn't bring you with me, but we are now allowed to spend more time out and about. There's no limits and there's nobody anywhere near here. So I think a day down at the island with it all to ourselves, we could have a bit of fun. Now, of course, conditions aren't brilliant because it's absolutely blazing sun, but I kind of don't mind that because it gives me an opportunity to share some ideas as to how you can still enjoy photography whether or not you've got harsh, bright midsummer sun. There's this kind of theory amongst landscape photographers that you can't possibly get decent images when conditions are like this. I kind of don't agree. It's going to be tough. There's no movement in the sea, there's no detail in the sky. You know, you've got to ask yourself, well, what are we going to be shooting? Well, don't know yet because I've only just got here. It's quite early in the morning though, so I will take advantage of that because really by about 11 o'clock it's going to be difficult certainly to shoot the tower, and the reason I'm here in front of it is because I think I might go for that as one of my first shots. Anyway, stick around, let's see what the day brings. Well, I've had a bit of a scout around and I think with the lack of movement in the sea, what I need to do is to find a little cove of which there are plenty to choose from around here. The tide's currently rolling out. It's going to be low tide about 10:30 and then rolling into high tide about 4:30 in the afternoon. So likely to get stranded on the island. Not worried about that. It'll keep any other people off. Last few times I've been here, there have been 2 or 3 other people, but really not many because it's a really long way from the nearest village. So really it's only mountain bikers that get this far down because it's quite a stretch for walkers. But anyway, yeah, I'm thinking one of these little coves, get set up down there. But before that, I might have a stab at the tower. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that I've lost my marbles bothering to take a shot of Tŵr Mawr in bright, sharp sunlight. But there is some method in the madness. Let me explain. At this time of day, the sun is still putting some nice side light on it without sitting behind it, because it won't be long before it's swung round, and for the greater part of the day, you're really competing with the sun sitting above the tower. So even if you've got interesting texture in the sky, it can be really difficult to get some really nice light on the front of the tower. So I've got that here with quite an interesting shadow line down the centre of the tower, and I've got it positioned just nicely on the right hand third. What I've also got is a really nice line of deep dark shadow running down into my bottom right hand corner. And again, you don't often have that demarcation between bright light and dark shadow. And I'm liking that contrast. I'm not one of these people that feels that during bright midday sun in the middle of summer, you can't do landscape photography. Now it remains to be seen whether you agree with me on that when I've completed the image, but I'll take my chances. Anyway, normally with this composition, your best time is when the sun is setting over there at this time of year. You get some side light on it from that angle, and that can be fabulous. But I'm here, this is the time of day I'm here, and I thought I'd make the most of it. Now what I've also done is, rather than park my tripod on the bald patch, which is still bald by the way, it's kind of where you're stood at the moment, and then just literally pointing my camera straight down at it, no worry about depth of field, nothing like that at all. What I wanted to do was to try and make it more interesting. Now, if you saw the video that I made a couple of weeks ago, just over there at the beach at Aberfraw, I talked about getting some depth into the image, because wide vistas without some foreground can look pretty boring. They just don't have the same impact. So, yet again, some sea pinks have come to my rescue. Now, there's only about half a dozen of them left still in, with any decent colour, still in bloom, just on a little pinnacle of rock. And so what I've done is another focus stack. I've focused on them. I'm shooting at 44mm, so obviously with this being micro four thirds, I'm running the risk of having trouble with my depth of field at only f5.6. So I've taken a second image focused on the tower, and those two images will give me plenty to work with in post. Now, what I've also got, and another good reason for shooting at this time of day, the quarry over at Trevor on the mainland on the Llyn Peninsula is catching some really nice light. I've got lots of lovely texture. Now, normally that line of hills is just a silhouette, so I'm taking advantage of that as well. I wouldn't have bothered even in, say, an hour's time, but it's still only about 9 o'clock in the morning, so I thought, yeah, worth having a go at this, because I only actually have one or two other images of this particular landmark in my portfolio. I'm not suggesting this is portfolio worthy, but most certainly worth taking a picture. What an absolutely fabulous day out I'm having here. You certainly won't hear me complaining about harsh light when you've got somewhere like this all to yourself on a day like this. Really, photography is taking a bit of a back seat. I've probably spent 2 hours just sitting on one of these pilot cottage walls looking at the view. Anyway, what caught my eye while I was doing that is the wide strip of Newborough Beach, completely empty of people. Something you wouldn't expect to see when the weather's like this. So I thought, I wonder if I can get an image of it. I've put my new long lens on. I'll tell you more about that lens in an upcoming video, but just to say, it's 75-300. And I'm shooting at 252mm, so in full frame equivalent of 500mm. It's actually getting me quite tight in on the beach. So I've been shooting a panorama all the way along, but the backdrop to that panorama is the mountain range from Relen all the way across to the Gliders. Even though I'm this far away, I noticed that when the beach was sharply focused, the mountain ridge was looking quite soft. So for each position of the panorama, I've taken 2 shots, one for the beach and the dunes, and then one for the mountain. So I'll stitch all of those together before I complete the panorama. I'm hopeful I'll be able to get enough contrast out of it. It is quite hazy, of course. I mean, you know, it's about 12 miles away. And on an afternoon like this, you'd expect the atmosphere to create problems with the light. It's not really going to be that sharp. But I am hopeful. I've got a lovely range of peaks. It goes all the way across from Relen and then Elediavawr sitting above Dinorwig Quarry. You can see the galleries and then the ridge that runs along Nant Francon all the way up to the Gliders. Bristly Ridge, Glydavach, Castell y Gwynt, and then Glydavawr. So we'll see how that one works out. Well, things are looking up. We've got a little bit of detail in the sky, and with a circular polarizer you can actually make something of it. Also, with the light coming across from left to right, it's kind of perfect on these rocks, and this lovely line of purple rocks is what caught my eye. I've been exploring these little coves that run along the right hand side of the island. I'd hoped to be able to get out far enough so I could have an unusual view back to the tower, but you can't see the tower from here, so I'm willing to bet if you could, I'd have seen plenty of photographs of it. Anyway, this particular finger of rock running out into that area of water where I can surround the tip of it by water, it doesn't break the horizon, it doesn't block any of the other rocks around it. Simple handheld shot, nothing spectacular, but this lovely dark purple rock with barnacles here and there on it, it's really quite interesting. Well, it's about time I started wending my weary way home, and I've come back off the island, but I'm not all done yet. As you can see, I've parked myself in the forest. This fringe of the forest along just behind the beach is one of my favourite locations in this neck of the woods. You may have seen on previous videos I've talked about it. What I love are those glimpses of the seascape in front of you, particularly where you've got a decent mountain ridge as a backstop. And this particular location is one that I've scouted before, but I haven't brought you along to show you an image of it. And the conditions today are absolutely perfect for it. What we've got is this beautiful pathway that leads your eye through down to the beach. There's a really interesting ridge of rock here running down at about 45 degrees on the right hand side of the frame. I've framed it up at 21mm, and what I've done is I've used a tree on the left hand side as a framing device. Now I haven't decided if I'm going to leave that in yet. Let's see how it looks when I get back and get it on the computer, but I've put it there to give me some balance where I've got trees on the other side as well to frame it. I've got a couple of thinner trees with some really nice wispy bits of pine needles just moving about in the breeze, and then of course this lovely slice of beach, the beautiful blue sea and the ridge beyond. Nobody on the beach to worry about walking through, so it's made my time very easy. Now, I've taken 3 shots of this. It's always going to be at least 2 shots, but I've taken 3 for insurance purposes. I focused quite close to the camera, just on the ridge of rock, and what I've done with that is I've overexposed by about a stop and a third, something like that, I think, so that this foreground here is really light. Now I can darken it down in post, but I didn't want it too dark in terms of what comes off the raw file, because it gives me more flexibility later on. Then I focused on one of the trees in the mid-ground and come back down about 2/3 of a stop, and then finally focused on the ridge on the horizon, and again another third or so darker for that one. I've got my 0.9 soft grad on at an angle to reflect the angle of the rock in the image, and I'll stitch those 3, maybe 2, but more likely I'll use all 3 in this case. But it's an absolutely beautiful idyllic little scene. It screams Newborough Forest, it really does. And I love these little vignettes of a bit of sea poking around between the trees of these magnificent pines. I've had an absolutely amazing day out. By no means the best in terms of photography, but in terms of a most fabulous piece of coastline to spend the day in the sun. You know, as lockdown locations go, it doesn't really get much better than this. Now, of course, as soon as I can, I'll be back out on those mountains. I'll be taking you with me, almost certainly in a tent. But for now, I'm going to say thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, why not subscribe now and join me next time? Cheers.